Welcome and thanks for joining us for the next panel. We do have a great panelist lineup and they'll be weighing up the benefits and risks of retail central bank digital currencies in this discussion. So let's start with some introductions. I'm joined by Chiron, Chief Strategy Officer at Payments Canada, Johan Schmalholz, Advisor in Payments and Financial Infrastructure and Senior Economist at Sveriges Riksbank, Harish Natarajan, Lead Payment Systems Development Group at the World Bank, and Marion Labor, Macro Strategist at Deutsche Bank. Now, it's certainly a timely event, given the announcement just this month from the Bank of England and HM Treasury. And it was particularly interesting, I'm sure you'll agree, to hear Will's thoughts around the launch of the CBDC task force. So we look forward to following that more closely here at Open Banking Expo. Besides that, there has been more hype generally around digital currencies. So without further ado, let's get the discussion underway. And I know I gave some rather brief introductions there. So if I can, I'd like to come to each of you in turn. So you can introduce yourselves a little bit more comprehensively and explain kind of your role and where you're coming from in terms of retail CBDC. So Siri, do you want to kick us off there?
Yeah, sure. So thank you for having me. I'm very glad to be part of this conversation. So I am the Chief Strategy Officer at Payments Canada, and we are a public purpose non-profit organization that owns and operates Canada's payments, clearing and settlement infrastructure, including associated systems, bylaws, rules, and standards. And within the company, my role is to manage the strategy and the research team. So we are really looking at everything that is going on in the payments ecosystem. So I have to say that my thoughts today that I will share are not necessarily the one of Payments Canada, but they are mine. But I'm going to try to also bring my learnings that I found in the research that we've done. And CBDC, retail CBDC is important for many reasons, but there is two really that comes to mind for me, which would be for financial inclusions, global competitiveness as well, that would be important, but it also needs to be designed in a way that is interoperable with existing systems. So I'm just going to stop now because it's the introductions, but that will be the reason why CBDC is important to me.
Great, thank you. And we can certainly pick up on those points you've already made further into the discussion. Johan, let's come to you next. What's your background here?
Yes, hello. Thank you very much for inviting me to this event. Yeah, my background, I'm from the Central Bank of Sweden, the Riksbank and the e-krona pilot division. And this division is responsible for conducting a proof of concept regarding CBDC. So the last year, we have established a technical solution for a retail CBDC, and I would like to share some of our experiences and findings from this first year.
Great, we look forward to hearing more about those. Harish, can you introduce yourself a little bit further, please, and the work you do at the World Bank?
Thank you. My name is Harish Natarajan. I lead a global team focused on payment systems and market infrastructures. We support our client countries, which are primarily the emerging markets and developing economies across the world, in supporting the developments of payment systems and market infrastructures to support their economic development goals and financial inclusion, and then to support their objectives towards ending extreme poverty and boosting shared prosperity. And our support ranges from support on enhancing the legal and regulatory framework, to provide a conducive environment for development of different business models and payment services, to also supporting institution capacity building, and then also building institutions in the country too, which can spearhead the development of payment systems. Thank you.
Great, thanks. And finally, last but not least, of course, Marion, what's your background here and what stimulated your interest in kind of digital currency, digital assets?
Yeah, thank you very much for having me today. I'm very glad to be there. I'm a macro strategist at Deutsche Bank, so I'm covering digital currency, payment, and fintech. Regarding my interest in digital assets, I think it started from 2014 when actually I started working on this topic at the Central Bank of Luxembourg. And as you may know, in 2007, Estonia experienced a series of cyber attacks, largely from Russian IP addresses. So this was kind of a wake-up call for Estonia to store their data in a more neutral countries and secure place. And that's why they ended up opening in 2017 the world's first data embassy in Luxembourg to secure government information in the event of another cyber attack.
Great. So let's start with kind of discussing, I guess, the possibilities, the potential that retail CBDC brings, because a lot of people are wondering how it's going to perhaps coexist or work alongside a fiat currency, and they just kind of wonder what the opportunities are in retail CBDC. Marion, perhaps you can explain a little more there about the potential that it offers.
Yeah, no, I think it really depends on the countries, and you have like a wide array of different motivations to issue a general purpose CBDC, like financial stability, monetary policy implementations, financial inclusion, payment efficiency, both domestic and cross-border, and payment security. I would say that among advanced economies, the primary motivation for developing a CBDC is probably to improve payment security, while emerging economies generally have a wider array of motivations, especially when the CBDC is designed to complement or substitute cash.
And Harish, something you mentioned in your introduction there was financial inclusion. Is that something that retail CBDC has the potential to kind of build on and improve?
No, I think that really depends on the context, and then I think and it also depends on how you define the financial inclusion, right? There are various definitions of that, but if one of the building blocks of financial inclusion is having access to make and receive payments and what we call as access to transaction accounts more broadly. And I think if that is the limited definition or the building block of financial inclusion, from looking at it from that perspective, I think CBDC is neither necessary nor sufficient, but in certain circumstances they might be important. But irrespective of whether the CBDC is a solution or not, I think there's very important preparatory work which is needed to allow for different approaches to financial inclusion to succeed, starting with improvements in the ID infrastructure in the country, then simplification of some of the account opening processes, and then also in terms of creating a role for a number of different players to enter the market with different business models, particularly the role for non-bank entities. And then also the distribution points, because many of the people will not immediately move towards transacting digitally. They might still need off-ramps and on-ramps to the digital store of value. So things like the distribution points in terms of agent locations in many of the emerging markets, and then of course other access points would be important. And then also, I think one also has to weigh CBDC against other developments in the markets, like fast payment services, which can have a similar experience in terms of speed and convenience. And then also things like open banking, which can also embed some of the experiences of payments into your day-to-day economic lives, being able to make payments from app, etc. Right? So I think that question is a little complicated. But having said that, I think the CBDC can have some very important implications, and the full effect of that really depends on the design. And very likely CBDC will coexist with other means of making payments. And it could have a very important impact on the market structure. It can now allow different business models to enter the market. You're no longer constrained by the existing payment infrastructures in the country. You can create some new arrangements. So that will put pressure. So, and all of that will perhaps lead to more innovation and more efficiencies in the economy. Thank you.
Okay, building on that then, Ciri, where do you see the potential for retail CBDC to really make an impact and also to sit alongside, as we mentioned, those fiat currencies?
a lot of impact, but I want to say first, like CBDC is a fiat currency. It is ultimately backed by trust in the central banks and government, like a fiat or the banknote or the coins that as we know it today. Retail CBDC merely moves these physical expressions of money into the digital space. Consequently, they can coexist so far as the central banks and the government wants them to coexist. Like we can go China, for example, expect to fully live with the digital yuan by the summer of 2022. I think it was the Olympic summer. And with that rollout, they decide to plan to phase out cash. So it will depend on the jurisdictions and on what everybody wants to do. However, in Canada, the Bank of Canada has signaled that CBDC would coexist with the existing payments infrastructures and cash as well. So rather than to serve a full display replacement if implemented, so they are thinking about having both. So everything will depend on which government wants to do and also on the design.
Yeah, and we'll pick up more on where Canada is at with retail CBDC a little bit more. But Johan, I want to bring you in here because, as you mentioned in your introduction, of course, Riksbank, you are in the first phase of the CBDC proof of concept. So can you give us some insight into that project, please?
Yes, we started this project in February last year, and after quite a long public procurement process, and we are cooperating with Accenture as the technical supplier of this solution. So during the first year, we have established a technical solution that is based on distributed ledger, blockchain, and token technology. So it's quite new technology we are working with, and during this first year, we have established a technical platform that is quite similar to the distribution model of cash, where we have tokens that are issued by the central bank. And these tokens are very similar to physical banknotes. A physical banknote has a unique serial number and a specific security features, which makes it identifiable as issued by a central bank. And in the same way, these tokens with retail CBDC or e-kronas, as we say, they are also uniquely identifiable by themselves. And you can trace them back to the central bank as an issuer. And we have built a solution model where we have participants in a distributed ledger network, and they are operating nodes in this network. And they can be, for example, payment service providers in this isolated test environment that we have. And they can also order CBDC or retail CBDC or e-kronas from the Riksbank. What we will do then is that we will debit their accounts in our RTGS system, and we will transfer digital central bank money from the RTGS system to the participants' nodes in this distributed ledger network. And by doing that, this will enable the end users like private persons, corporates, and authorities to order retail CBDC from the participants. And in order to do that, they need a payment account and an electronic wallet. So they will debit their electronic wallet will be credited and their bank account will be debited. And after that, they are in the position to conduct payments within this network.
So how far along are you then with this pilot project? I mean, what are the next steps from here?
Yeah, we have recently concluded the first phase of this project, and we published a report about 1.5 weeks ago. So you can read about our experience more in detail there. But we're now moving into the second phase of this project, where we will look into more details regarding this DLT and blockchain solution. For example, we will look into the possibility to conduct offline payments within this network. And we will also look into the challenges regarding addressing of payments, because I think we are moving away from using complicated bank account numbers and so forth, and we are more and more working with alias systems. So we will look into a more simplified addressing mechanism and see what we can find out there. And we will also look into the point of sale scenario and how would the payees that receives payments in point of sale, for example, retailers, how can they handle payments with their retail CBDC in their existing payment terminals and their existing IT systems? That is something that we're going to look into in more detail in the next phase of the pilot, or the proof of concept.
And Cyrielle, I want to bring you in again here, because I know you alluded earlier to the fact that Canada's central bank sees digital currency very much sitting alongside cash rather than replacing it. So can you explain to us a little bit more about kind of the outlook then in your region? How far is Canada along in its journey towards sort of retail CBDC?
So I just like to state that it's the Bank of Canada that is developing the CBDC. That's not us. So I can't really speak on behalf of the bank on where they're at, but right now we are deeply having a lot of conversation within the ecosystems to make sure that what is being built can live in Canada and make sense in Canada. So they have a lot of consultations and papers that they're putting out. There's a lot of thinking being made, especially on the design, and working together, making sure, as I said, it makes sense. Because right now in Canada, we are doing what we call a payments modernization, that we are modernizing our payment system. So we are making sure that everything that is being developed, it's kind of talking to each other. So we are in a early stage of mainly thinking, because there's a lot of things to take into account, making sure that nothing is just being done in a rush. But it is being thought through. It is being thought through as a complementary as what already happens. It is also being made as a contingency plan. That's the bank is saying that they are working on this. And they are thinking about a lot of different aspects that has been mentioned, because designing this need to be thought through, making sure we don't design something that's going to be negative for the ecosystem. There's a lot of conversations around, could these intermediate banks, could this, also increase new channels of illicit activities? So that's kind of the signals that are there in the market, but it's not necessarily, those that are stopping or accelerating. They're just, everything is being thought through. Also the questions of universal accessibility, similar that cash, everyone can access cash. So this is also something that needs to be taken account. And it was mentioned, thinking about offline functionality. So universal access is important. Privacy as well, it's important that to be taken into account, because that cash is fully anonymous. So this going to have some aspects that are maybe not necessarily going to be fully private. So balancing between being traditionally anonymous and also making sure we have the right visibility, will be important. There's a lot of things that are taken on based on the design, and I can talk about system resiliency, making sure that everything works properly. And the last bit that is being thought through as well is adoption and encourage widespread adoption. It's good to build a CBDC, but also it is important to understand how this can be used and how the market is going to react to this. So all of this is being thought through and is being worked on, and I'm sure the Bank of Canada will have more to say because they are doing a lot of research on that.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It sounds like Canada is going through quite a few changes there in terms of modernising money and really thinking about the design of CBDC. And that's something we'll explore a bit more later on in this discussion. So I'll come back to you on that, Siri, to talk about sort of technical and design side of things. But Harish, given that this is such a new concept for most kind of consumers, this idea of retail digital currency, perhaps you can explain how will digital currencies be kind of classified? Will it be known as e-money? What are we talking about when we're talking about CBDC, really?
No, I think this is a topic which is of getting a lot of attention from regulators and standard-setting bodies. So I will not offer a formal definition, but I can perhaps give a definition by negation, in the sense that it is certainly not e-money, and it's certainly not a traditional bank account. There are certain characteristics, I think, which are very important to include in the definition to kind of clearly distinguish between CBDC and other forms of money. Firstly, I think it is a liability of the central bank, right? So irrespective of the way it is distributed and how you initiate payment using a CBDC, ultimately it is a liability of the central bank versus the current approaches, like when you use an account to make use an account to make a transfer, or you use a debit card or an e-money application. Those are all liability of the institution which is offering the service to you or maintaining that account for you. But in the case of central bank digital currency, it will very clearly be a liability of the central bank. And then that it is clearly one of the representations of the fiat currency. So in that sense, it should not distinguish from the fiat currency. So it has the same legal tender status, and the legal kind of structure around the fiat currency should apply to CBDC as well. And then also to reinforce that point, I think it has to be fully interchangeable with the fiat currency. So in that sense, you should be able to move from one form of the fiat currency to the other. So in that sense, it has to be fully interchangeable. So I think any element, any definition will have to bring all these elements together, and it's certainly not e-money. I hope I answered your question. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Marian, I wanted to bring you in here. Harish said, it's definitely not e-money. And I wanted to get a bit of an explanation from you as well in terms of classification and the kind of characteristics of sort of retail digital currencies.
So, I mean, if we look at the definition, and it's what Cyrielle mentioned before, the digital euro would still be a euro. I mean, if we take, for example, the case of the euro, and it's like banknote, but it's digital. So it would be an electronic form of money issued by a central bank, the euro system in this case. In terms of classification, I particularly like the taxonomy of money, which is called the money flower, the one which is defined by the Bank of International Settlement by 4 different dimensions. The first one is the issuer, who is issuing the money, basically. The second dimension is accessibility. Is it wide access or restricted access? Third dimension is the support. Is it digital versus physical? And the last dimension is the transmission. Is it like peer-to-peer, so token-based, or is it intermediated? So by definition, a retail CBDC is digital, widely accessible, and issued by a central bank with a peer-to-peer token-based transmission.
And Marian, what are some of the kind of use cases then for a retail CBDC? I think, I guess it's important to understand exactly, why do we need another kind of form of currency? What is it going to be used for?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I don't think a CBDC is magic. It's not going to solve all the issue suddenly. However, there are a couple of motivations that I mentioned earlier on. And if we look at the overall trend, clearly there is a decrease of cash as a mean of payment, which has been sped up by the COVID-19. And there are more and more research on CBDC. So first use case, probably the decrease of cash as a mean of payment, and it's not a new trend. It has been the case in Sweden since 2007, 2008, and but this trend has clearly sped up in other countries over the past year. Second motivation is probably reinforcing payment, and especially cross-border payment, and all the security of payment, I would say. And the first case is financial inclusion, probably, which is one of the main objectives as well for China.
Yeah, the idea of kind of financial inclusion there is something I know Harish touched upon earlier. Siri, perhaps I can bring you in here. I mean, are digital currencies the best solution to improve financial inclusion, but also just payment systems in general and cross-border payments as well?
So, as everyone's saying, I don't think this is the only solution. It is another solution that is brought up to the market, and I agree, for financial inclusions, everything will depend on the context and on the market as well. So in Canada, we are a very highly banked population, so it's not the same as if you would go to other countries where you don't necessarily have the same infrastructures. But we see, as it was discussed, that it could help bringing those who don't necessarily have access to banking and payments, giving them an access among others that maybe actually are already there, and bringing them choice and just including them more into the financial system. So there is definitely this. And obviously design and everything needs to be taken into account. With other payments infrastructure and other challenges, we would say, in cross-border payment, it is also key. We know that cross-border payments, it's painful today. It's painful, it's costly, it's long. There's nothing new here. So a CBDC could be a tool that can help, would say, improve the system or bring an alternative to what is currently there, and could be less costly and faster than the traditional correspondent banking system, or even, what the card network could bring. So I think it's just bringing more choice and more competitions to end users. And this thing it's very important, because with the market being more open and having a lot of different players that are coming in the system that are developing new things, that we want it or not, and good or bad is the question, but there are other players that are coming, so just bringing another choice that could be thought being safer to the end users. So it just does innovation. It's always very important to bring that to the market and to explore further.
Yeah, Harish, we've heard there about sort of the opportunity for retail CBDC to perhaps ease some of those cross-border payments kind of pain points. Do you see that helping there as well? And just more generally, how do you think that retail CBDC is going to help when it comes to kind of payment systems and getting those unbanked into the financial kind of industry?
No, I think this point on financial inclusion, I think, needs to be studied a little bit more carefully. It does seem quite appealing to look at CBDC as something which will help on financial inclusion, and there are certain contexts, as I mentioned, that it could certainly help. But I think if you look at some of the analysis which has been done by the World Bank based on surveys, there is a survey which we do once in 3 years called the Findex. And there we ask a question to people, do you have an account? What do you do with it? And so on. And for the people who say they do not have an account, then the question is asked, why don't you have an account, right? And it's very interesting to look at the reasons why people, the reasons which people cite. And it all boils down to things basically around, from a supply side perspective, the providers of services do not find it economical to service them. So for them, it is too high to service certain segments of the society. Then for the demand side, it is too expensive for them to access it, either because of the explicit fees or because of the implicit cost related to having to travel to a particular location, or having to buy some particular type of device which they might not be able to afford. And then there's one other point about utility, in terms of what is it that they can do with it. If it is not very useful for them, then why would they go ahead? Why would they go and open an account? So I think we have to really see which of those three reasons would CBDC really resolve. And I think therein lies the answer in terms of whether CBDC would help in financial inclusion from the perspective of getting access to a transaction account. Financial inclusion, of course, means other things in terms of access to credit, investment, and risk management products, etc. Right? So looking at it from the limited perspective of the transaction accounts, I think we have to really look at these three questions. In terms of cross-border payments, I think there are a lot of other issues which have to be resolved in addition to for CBDC's potential to be fully realized, and those relate to things like harmonization of the regulatory aspects related to AML CFT, kind of consistent application of those requirements, and then data formats, data standardization. And so all of those things also need to get resolved, and without those, CBDC cannot do anything by itself. But what CBDC does do is gives another tool which could be included in the tool set of the regulators and the public authorities to kind of motivate change in the market. So that's a way perhaps to look at it. Like for example, in the world of cross-border payments, CBDC could help in enabling the participants in the financial system to exchange payments amongst themselves, even outside of business hours, even on holidays, right? And that has important implications for the speed of cross-border payments, and then also being able to do it in a peer-to-peer manner can really improve the speed and also transparency. So that's where I would leave it. Thank you.
And Marion, something that Siri mentioned earlier, of course, was the kind of design aspect of this. So I was wondering, in terms of sort of technical and design considerations when building CBDCs, what needs to be taken into account here?
Yeah, so actually, in the end, what matters is the adoption of a CBDC from consumers and business. So consumer needs are clearly driving choices about CBDC designs. And I would say we have like 4 different needs from consumers. First one being consumers want digital currency to have a cash-like functionality with peer-to-peer payment and to be secure and convenient for real-time payment. Second one is the strong demand for cyber security, so to have resilient operations. And these demands will shape CBDC infrastructures and determine whether currency databases should be centrally controlled or decentralized, perhaps with digital ledger technology, such as the blockchain technology. The third one that we have is that consumers want to use a digital currency if it's simple and universally accessible. And they're also likely to favor some form of privacy that's similar to what cash is offering. And in terms of setting up technology for privacy, there is always a trade-off between the identity system, so account-based tokens on one side, and on the need for an anonymous crypted system on the other side that we call digital tokens. And the fourth one is, as Arish pointed out, the ability to make cross-border payments. And this is feasible via technical connections at the wholesale level, and this will improve and strengthen the wholesale and retail interlinkages.
Yeah, just picking up on that kind of privacy and security aspect there. Siri, is that quite important when it comes to building retail CBDCs, when compared especially to sort of wholesale CBDCs? I guess consumers are looking for a bit of reassurance, aren't they, when it comes to security and privacy?
Yeah, so They would be a bit different because you're right. There's the end users, the consumers here that would be included in that equation. So making sure that we are with any system, it's not only with CBDC, but we are protecting them from fraud and from potential scam or from everything. That's something that is very important. And we're talking about, commercial bank money as well. So it's just a different aspects on who they are, but it is true. The resiliency and the security is very important, but it was mentioned as well. And on the other side, there's the privacy. So a CBDC is definitely could definitely help with the security, but even money overall, because you can see on how it could fight everything which is anti-money laundering and anti-terrorism money, all of these things that could happen, because we have a better view of what is going on versus that if it's only cash and it is private. However, what the end users like with cash is the anonymity of it. So I'm not the one who's going to design it, but having this in mind, it's going to be it's not an easy way to think about it, because you have to bring the two things that are always in competitions, and how to give freedom in some way and also bring security. So I would be more interested to hear what the others have to say about that, because when you're thinking about developing this, how do you actually tackle that?
Yeah, perhaps this is a good point as well to bring in Johan, because to perhaps talk a bit more about that aspect of it, but also the opportunity to use kind of blockchain as a technical base for a CBDC. Johan, can you pick up on this?
Yes, when we're talking about anonymous payments, I think it's quite a tricky issue, because we have a more and more extensive AML legislation, at least in Europe. So it's quite hard to allow anonymous payments for larger amounts. I think the limit is of about 150 euros today. So that is really a tricky issue. I mean, I don't think that the central bank can have some kind of separate trail that allows anonymous payments that are not allowed within the commercial banking payments. So I think that is a complicated issue. When it comes to the distributed ledger, blockchain, and tokens, there are advantages and there are also challenges from our findings during the first year of this proof of concept. And I think one advantage is that when you use tokens, they are quite similar to cash or to physical banknotes. They are uniquely identifiable as money issued by a central bank, and you don't need a specific storage facility to store them in, like a specific account with specific regulation around it, because the money itself, you can identify it as central bank money. So that's I think quite a large advantage from a technical perspective. But there are also challenges when you use blockchain technology, and in our solution, what we have discovered is that we have, when you conduct a payment with this retail CBDC, the e-krona, then the payment service provider of the payee needs to validate all the historic transactions that are associated with this transaction that is going to be made, and that means that there is information regarding previous transactions with other end users and other payment service providers, and that's a bit of a challenge from a data protection and bank secrecy perspective, because you can't share that kind of information openly. So that is something that to have in mind.
Johan, can you talk at all about how, or if retail CBDCs can kind of complement open banking initiatives to ensure that kind of current regulation doesn't suffer from this kind of new innovation that we're seeing?
Yeah, Yeah, open banking, it's quite a wide concept. You can look at it from a more legal point of view, and you look at the second payment services directive in Europe, which allows for third-party providers to get access to payment accounts at banks and payment service providers. And that is quite specific. It has to be payment accounts. It has to be money on an account. It has to be provided by a payment service provider in order for that legislation to be applicable. And if you try to apply that legislation to a central bank, I mean, a central bank is not considered to be a payment service provider in the means of the second payment service directive, and I think it's not. You can choose different solutions for the storage of a retail CBDC. It could be a traditional account, it could be some kind of payment account, but it could also be an electronic wallet, and it could be containing tokens instead of an anonymous balance like a traditional bank account. So I think it's a bit hard, but of course, if you have a more comprehensive view of the concept of open banking, of course, the central bank could voluntarily apply an open banking model and allow access for third parties to a retail CBDC that is held by a central bank.
Ciri, can I bring you in here and find out what you think in terms of retail CBDCs sort of complementing open banking initiatives that, you know, are already sort of regulated? What's your view on this?
I actually don't disagree with what Rosgeni said. I don't think I have much to add on, but it's clear that if the regulation is helping opening access, to systems, it helps bringing new providers, new players into the equations, and bringing more innovation, and also bringing more choice and more competitions for the end users. So obviously having a regulation that clearly also help regulate, I would say, but they help protect the end users to make sure that all of this is safe to be used, is clearly very important. So it's definitely for any new things coming up, not only for CBDC, that an open system would definitely help broader experience overall. But it needs to be taken into consideration, that it needs to be well thought through and protected for the end users as well. So it's definitely something that would help bring more players and innovation in the market for sure.
We're talking about sort of retail CBDC, and obviously, Johan, you've spoken about the pilot project that's underway, and but I'm interested to hear from you all fairly kind of succinctly, if possible, about where you see sort of money in 5 years' time. I mean, is this kind of retail digital currency on the horizon? You know, what timescale are we talking about here in terms of when it will be kind of entering the mainstream, if you like? Marion, can I come to you first on this?
Yeah, so we can clearly see that the pandemic has hastened the decline of cash as a mean of payment, probably by 4 or 5 years. And the world has kind of shifted from asking whether digital currency will succeed to how and when they will become mainstream. And central bankers, policymakers have reacted by speeding up the existing research and launching pilots, the first one having been the Bahamas last year. And my personal point of view is that emerging economies may continue to dominate the race. And for 3 reasons. Mainly, first, because advanced economies are faced to few challenges, which the first one being the level of interest rates, which are pretty low, and the view on anonymous transactions, and demography. We have a much older demography, and older demography are less prone to experiment new technology. and we are used to use cash. We have ingrained cards habit, and it's very convenient to pay by cards.
And Harish, I'm going to ask you the same question about where you see money in sort of 5 years' time. Will retail digital currency have become the norm, as it were?
No, I think that is very difficult to say. I think, as with many technological developments, it is very easy to kind of overestimate how soon it could happen, and you might underestimate the speed at which it can happen once it takes hold. So I would not venture into that. But all I would say is that very clearly there are different forms of money. What forms money can take is basically being discussed across the world by different players, and very clearly there'll be more forms of money. But ultimately, what will become mainstream is really depends on what the society wants. So I think there's a broader question of what does society really want, and I think we need to all keep that in mind. Thank you.
And Johan, you might have a slightly different perspective, I guess, with your involvement in the pilot project. So 5 years' time, where will we be?
Yeah, I think we are in an interesting time now where the concept of money is really being questioned and challenged. And I think from the central bank perspective, I think the Libra initiative was really an eye-opener and really put that topic on the agenda. And within 5 years, I think we will have more central bank retail CBDC initiatives. So like that was mentioned before, we have the Bahamas that is live today, and there will probably be more initiatives live.
Ciri, do you agree with that?
Yes, I do. And there is just one thing I want to add to everything has been said, and we didn't really talk about, is the rise of alternative digital payments methods and all the stable coins and all of those other digital currencies that are definitely growing. We are seeing the rise of use of all those private digital currencies or tokenized assets like NFTs. And I think this is something that we definitely need to keep watching. Because we can certainly see that the pandemic accelerated the level of comfort with everything which is virtual payments.
Well, that brings this part of the discussion to an end. So I want to thank all the panelists, Johan, Marian, Ciri and Harish, for joining us today. We've certainly heard there about some of the potential that retail CBDC has to offer. So now we're going to open up with the live Q&A. So now we come on to the questions that have been coming in during the panel discussion, and we've had a number of really interesting questions. I think that debate has really got people thinking. So Johan, in fact, I'm going to come to you first. I've had a question in about the Riksbank report, and in it someone said it highlights that the tech you scaled to meet the KPIs you had set in the procurement was still below what you'd expected or hoped for. So what kind of scalability or speed should a retail CBDC provide?
Yeah, well, I don't think that our expectations were not fulfilled because in this limited test environment that we have set up, I think the solution fulfilled our requirements actually. But of course, there are challenges, and I think that our requirements concern that we should handle about 100,000 simultaneous users, and each payment should take no longer than 1 second or something like that. But of course, there are possibilities to really try more complicated scenarios, which involves more transactions and several parties in each transaction. So this is something that we will look into in the second phase of the e-krona proof of concept at the Riksbank.
And just remind me, is that second phase underway or starting soon?
Yes, it has actually started now. So we are planning for an activity that we are going to look into the performance issues of these solutions.
Great. So we'll hear more from that soon then, I would imagine. And another question that's come in, I'm going to come to you on this, Ciri. What is the impact to the common man? Is retail CBDC just another wallet, or will CBDCs provide new products and services to retail clients?
So it's true for the common man. We think about the end users. Everything will be about the value proposition. What does the CBDC bring to the end users? And this can definitely vary based on the countries and the jurisdictions we are in, because not every end users will have the same need. Now, in terms of, is it another wallet or another thing that we already have? The answer could be yes and no. Everything depends on the design, on how it's going to be distributed. Is it going to bring new product and services? I like to think yes, because each time there is something new in the market, even if it's slow to adapt, it usually brings new products and new things, choice, as I keep mentioning today, for the consumers. So I do think it is an opportunity to bring innovation in the market and maybe things we don't know already that could happen. Because it will provide something more secure, it will definitely bring value propositions to end users. But a lot of things will have to be thought through in order to bring the right value propositions to the right end users in the right jurisdictions.
And Marion, you have a slightly from a different perspective, I suppose, here from a bank perspective. So what do you have to add on that?
Yeah, the only thing that I would add on what Ciri just mentioned, it's probably one word about the key design features of central bank money. And what we can reasonably expect is the consumers to hold the account at the central bank, but it will still be intermediated by commercial bank. And from my understanding, I don't think there is a country or central bank who is expected to do all the KYC, IML, and adding more responsibilities to what they are doing.
Okay, let's move on to another question that's come in. Harish, I'm going to ask this to you first of all. Are central banks suddenly opening up to the idea of digital currencies because they're worried about cryptocurrencies?
Well, there is certainly some linkage, but the work on CBDC started kind of many years back, and all these topics of cryptocurrencies, stable coins, and CBDC, in some sense, one builds off of the other and then influences the other, and so on. So I think it is very difficult to say this influenced that in a linear fashion, so to say, right? But certainly there is some linkage. It shows kind of the rise of or at least a proposal. No? There's a proposal of stable coins does have implications for central banks, and in that sense there is certainly some influence on that. But as I said before, I think there was research on CBDCs even before that.
And Johan, do you want to come in on that as well? Are central banks worried about cryptocurrencies?
I think I think I mentioned that before. Of course, that was some kind of an eye opener when the Libra initiative really turned out, and so of course that is something that the central bank have in mind, the emergence of cryptocurrencies that are challenging national borders, and so of course that is something that is on the radar of the central banks and something that is on their mind.
And I'm going to stick with you, Johan, for this next question that's come in. Someone said, don't we need a global real-time gross settlement scheme to manage the risks of money / value / crypto moving in and out of e-wallets?
Yeah, there is quite an extensive international work within this field at the moment. There is 20-point program that is, I think, was launched by the Bank for International Settlements and the Financial Stability Board. And these international organizations are really looking into the issue of cross-border payments, and also in association to central bank digital currency. So I think these issues are really on the international agenda. And of course, in an ideal world, we would only have one currency and one settlement system, but that is not the case. And there is extensive work in this field in order to make progress and make international payments faster and more efficient.
And Harish, is that what you're seeing as well?
No, I agree with Johan. Of course, very clearly this question, I presume, pertains to the cross-border dimension. There are many ways in which cross-border usage of CBDC can be facilitated in terms of a payment settlement system arrangement. There is a good report from the Bank of England, Monetary Authority of Singapore, which proposed different options, including having bridge institutions, interlinking, and then of course a common multilateral system. And as Johan mentioned, there is a particular building block which in the G20 roadmap, which seeks to explore that possibility. But even there, it is not intended to be one platform. There could be multiple such platforms which can get interlinked. So I think the answer is that my answer would be it is not necessary to have one system to address all the risks. There are many ways of doing it, but certainly there will be some new systems which will evolve, and very likely they will also get interlinked with other such systems, and then also with other traditional systems. Thank you.
Okay, now it was only a matter of time before we had a question about blockchain, and Johan, I'm going to direct this one at you. Is the speed of blockchain not an issue when it comes to CBDCs?
This is something that I also mentioned before, that in the Acrona proof of concept we have looked into this blockchain technology, and of course there are challenges concerning an extensive chain of previous transaction that has to follow each new transaction, and of course there is some kind of limit that you can't store these transactions forever, and there are several technical solutions in order to get by that. And one is the so-called chain snipping, that you cut the transaction chain and create a new, start all over again. And so I think there will probably be a lot of smart technical solution in order to get by these potential issues. Okay,
hopefully that answers the question. And Cyrielle, I want to come to you. We've had someone ask, is it realistic to expect retail and wholesale CBDCs to remain distinct solutions, or will they converge in the long term and force a set of trade-offs, e.g. in the privacy space?
So I like when people ask me to predict the future. I don't know. But you can see everything, how it will evolve, right? If there is adoption, if there is, depends on designs, you could imagine anything. But you have to keep in mind that every countries are looking at this maybe a little bit differently. Every countries already today have different payment systems. Some countries have only one. I'm thinking about Switzerland. And in Canada, we have currently two. We're building a third one with the real-time rail. So every country will be different. The needs will be based, the design will be based on the needs. So why not? But everything will have to be thought through, and the risk to evaluate to have one versus multiple rails will be very important to take into considerations.
Okay. Thank you for at least sort of trying to forecast the future a little bit there. I know crystal ball gazing is not everyone's favourite pastime, but that is all we have time for. So I'd just like to say thank you to the panel for joining us and answering all of those questions that came in, and of course to all of you watching who sent in the questions. Thank you. I hope we've cleared some of those up for you. And all it leaves me to do is to say goodbye for now and pass back to Kelly.